I play League of Legends relatively casually. I don't particularly like it, but I, like many people, find it adequately serves as a decently engaging communal activity. It's the millennial equivalent of playing backgammon while smoking outside the coffee shop after work. But I'm not here to talk about League of Legends the game. I'm here to talk about the very clumsily written and terribly handled narrative fiction attached to League of Legends. And specifically, I want to talk about a line that sometimes shows up when you're loading into a match. A line that I have to stare at for a few minutes about once a day. A line that is incredibly misleading and emblematic of the messy handling of League's story. A line that refers to the League of Legends storyline that draws explicit parallels to the Holocaust, deals with themes of class privilege, systemic oppression, and racism, and uses magic as an analogy for homosexuality. In short, a line that is very, very important to get right, and one that was unfortunately done very, very wrong. Lux trusted Sylas. Now, innocent Demacians are dead. Before I get into the awfulness that is that pair of statements, let's set the stage for this train wreck of a story. One of the difficulties that comes with talking about the lore of League of Legends is that there have been several grand retcons throughout its history, so it's likely that some of these details may be inaccurate or contradicted by other material. It won't affect the overall point of this video, but if I do get some of the specifics wrong, it's because the principal players of this story originate from vastly different periods of the canon that have been grafted together. The other main difficulty is that the narratives of League are constantly being shifted and added onto whenever a new champion is released. Very rarely are the individual narratives actually advanced, and when they are, it's almost never through the same point of view. Put another way, whenever the world state is advanced, however uncommon that is, we don't learn about the state of every character, leaving the stories of entire factions in an odd sort of stasis that's occasionally altered when a new character is inserted into the world. This is way worse with some characters than others, most notably the Yordles, who have been in a sort of limbo existence for years now. Occasionally this will result in amazing lore missteps with ridiculous implications that are hastily rewritten, as was the case with Seraphine and Skarner's people. But other times, those implications are ignored and left to fester, as is the case with Sylas. League of Legends, or LoL, is a multiplayer online battle arena, or MOBA, developed by Riot Games that started out as a standalone version of a custom game mode called Defense of the Ancients, or Dota, for Warcraft 3, the third game in a series of real-time strategy, or RTS games developed by Blizzard, that released in 2002, and eventually got its own proper sequel, owned by Blizzard in 2013, called Dota 2, with the serial numbers filed off, released in 2009. The important takeaway from that string of acronyms is that League inherited a lot of the aesthetics and cliches of the Warcraft universe when it was created, one of which is the Kingdom of Demacia, which is effectively the same place as the Kingdom of Stormwind from the Warcraft universe, all the way down to the color scheme. Warcraft as a series is deeply entrenched in racial factions due to a quirk of its nature as an RTS. Each playable faction in the Warcraft games is typically made up of a single race with their own characteristics and playstyle. There's some pretty gross coding and ludonarrative to unpack there, but we're going to mostly ignore it since it's only tangentially related to League of Legends. Stormwind is the kingdom of humans in the Warcraft universe, and its defining characteristics are the shining white city that serves as a capital, ruled over by a high king and his cadre of noble families, and the holy paladins that protect them. Demacia is much the same, but League doesn't really have non-humans in the way that Warcraft does, so the racial tensions are gone. But a main part of Stormwind is the constant conflict that encroaches on it, so that conflict needs to be replaced by something. The solution that Riot came up with was to have Demacia be anti-mage for fear of magic endangering the populace. This will have consequences down the line. Of the 161 playable characters in League, 17 are native to or residents of Demacia. Of those, 3 are some form of god and therefore don't directly interact with the Demacian people. 1 is a monster who roams the countryside, 1 is a demon hunter dedicated solely to her mission, and 1 is a part of a group called the Sentinels and is no longer affiliated with the country. Of the 11 characters who are part of Demacia's story, 6 came out in 2010, 2 came out in 2011, 1 each came out in 2012 and 2013, and the most recent Demacian champion, including those who aren't directly related to Demacia's narrative, is Sylas, who released in 2019. Sylas is set apart from his countrymen by 2 major things. He is the first, and so far only, Demacian character that's portrayed as villainous, and he is the first, and so far only, Demacian character to have come out since the Grand Retcon of 2014, where the lore of League of Legends was completely overhauled. This means Sylas is effectively the only character to have moved Demacia's narrative forward, thus making his story the focal point of Demacia's modern existence. Again, this will have consequences down the line. The principal characters of our tale are Jarvan IV, the Crown Prince, newly turned King of Demacia, Garen and Lux Crownguard, the scions of the most influential noble family in Demacian politics, and Sylas of Dreadborn, the most dangerous mage in the land, with side mentions of Galio, a big golem that defends Demacia from mages and runs on magic he absorbs from them, and Shyvana, a half-dragon with a kind of fuzzy origin who saved Prince Jarvan's life and has since been the object of affection for the prince despite her magical nature. Sylas' story is told in a few forms: his official character bio, several short stories, a video or 2, and the 5 issues of the Lux comic. I'll be focusing on the last one because it's the most straightforward, and the visuals add a lot of nuance to the story. That might sound like a good thing. It isn't. Our story starts with Sylas as a young man. Born a mage in Demacia, and therefore considered a public menace, he is convinced to turn himself into the government, where, instead of life imprisonment, the usual punishment for existing as a mage, they make use of his unique ability to sense magic in the ambient world. Sylas joins the Mage Seekers, the principal enforcers of Demacia's anti-mage laws. Think the Spanish Inquisition, but for magic instead of religion. This eventually ends poorly when Sylas tries to protect a young girl from the Mage Seekers, but accidentally channels her incredibly potent electricity magic, killing the girl and the Mage Seekers with him. Sylas goes on the run before eventually being caught and put in solitary confinement in the Mage Prison, where he's shackled with petricite, a material that absorbs any magic that touches it, thus preventing magic's use. Several years pass, and Sylas is eventually visited in secret by Lux, who is attempting to get rid of her magic for fear of being arrested. Sylas helps Lux learn to control her powers in return for her lending him some books to read. Sylas is about to use his newly acquired knowledge to break out of prison when he's suddenly taken for execution. Turns out, Lux being a mage is an open secret among her family, but because they're rich hypocrites, she doesn't get the same treatment that other mages get. Still, they're worried about Lux's magic being revealed, not because she would be imprisoned, but because it would cause a scandal for the family and reduce their political power. To prevent this, Garen gets his friend, Prince Jarvan, who is being hassled to marry by his father, to agree to have Lux as his bride, using the logic that the wife of the future king would be immune to scrutiny as a mage, even more so than she already is. The logic is sound considering Jarvan's previous crush, Shyvana, who for some unexplained reason just doesn't appear in the story, was very obviously magical, and it went unacknowledged but not unrecognized by the elite. The execution of Sylas was ordered by Tiana, the head of the Crown Guard family, to, I guess, keep him away from Lux, but it kind of seems like the execution is to punish Lux for befriending him instead of the other way around. Lux rushes to the execution to try and stop Sylas' death, to no avail. But her presence allows Sylas to siphon her magic through his shackles, and use the stored up magic to break free and kill his would-be executioners. Sylas then breaks the mages out of their prison and starts a rebellion. He fights his way into the royal castle, defeats but spares Garen as a favor to Lux, and captures Jarvan. And someone, we still don't know who, kills the king in the confusion. Sylas holds a public trial and execution of Jarvan, now Jarvan IV, but is interrupted by Lux and Garen, who eventually scatter the mages in a rout. Jarvan decides that all mages need to be killed, Garen starts doing that, but spares Lux, who continues living her life as if nothing happened, and Sylas starts gathering more support from the populace to attempt another coup. Okay, first things first. This is a cowardly and despicable piece of writing. There is absolutely no excuse for positioning a man who was used, abused, imprisoned, and tortured by a racist hereditary monarchy as a villain for breaking free from an execution ordered by a noble family trying to hide some personal shame. Innocent Demacians aren't dead, because no one who oppresses their own people is innocent. This isn't the story of a crazed criminal killing indiscriminately, it's the story of a man overthrowing a corrupt government with force. Force that is both justified and absolutely necessary, seeing as the government's response to a minority peacefully living their life is imprisonment without trial or explanation at best, and a combination of forced movement and casual genocide at worst. If that was all there was to the story of Sylas, then I would still think it was a bad piece of writing, but it wouldn't offend me the same way it does. And I take that offense because of the symbology and analogy that suffuses the whole mess. Let's start with Sylas himself. We can all but ignore the, shall we say, less than subtle symbolism of Sylas using the manacles that imprisoned him as his weapons, and Sylas being unable to innately use magic, but capable of seeing the magic in other people and channel it into himself, literally drawing his strength from his fellow oppressed. The more important things are two defining physical features, a small scar on his abdomen, and the blue tattoo on his right shoulder. The scar is from a forced experimental surgery to remove a theorized organ that produces the magic inherent to mages. This surgery was obviously a failure, as no such organ exists. The tattoo is actually the symbol of the Mage Seekers that they brand on those they captured to mark them as mages. If that doesn't put a sour taste in your mouth, I suggest reading Mouse to orient yourself. Next is Lux, our main character for the comic. She struggles to hide and control the intrinsic magic that exists within herself, fearing that she would be persecuted if it came to light. She takes a potion meant to get rid of her magical ability, and harbors some complicated feelings about her nature, initially trying to suppress it. If you haven't picked up on the hint there yet, it's an analogy for queerness in openly homophobic and transphobic societies. So, we have a gleaming city of whites and golds, ruled over by all-powerful noble families who ignore the rules they impose on the rest of the kingdom. We have a branded and imprisoned genetic minority as a villain, and we have a young highborn girl who opposes the reformation of her country, in part because she's protected from persecution by her wealth and status as our hero. And we end with no resolution other than an ongoing genocide. And to top it all off, Lux, part of the elite nobility, has blonde hair and blue eyes, a trait she shares with exactly one other named character in the story, her Aunt Tiana, the head of her family. There are many, oh so very many problems with Riot Games, and the story of Sylas is not even in the top 10 in terms of importance. So why am I focusing on this instead of, say, the rampant sexual misconduct, slew of reprehensible business dealings, or being owned entirely by Tencent? Well, there's two reasons. First, those are all complicated and delicate topics that veer into territory outside of what I'm qualified to talk about. And second, I think the story of Sylas is a good example of the irresponsible storytelling that's frustratingly prevalent in video games. I could take easy potshots at the war crimes and propaganda in the Call of Duty games, or the blatant over-sexualization, infantilization, or exclusion of women in any number of popular franchises, but these narratives exist even in games that are otherwise very well written. Sylas' Mage Rebellion being framed as evil, while using signifiers of the persecution of Jewish, Romani, Black, disabled, and queer people, among others, during the Holocaust, is so ridiculously bad that it would be comical if it didn't infuriate me. I wasn't originally aiming to insult or tear down the writers behind this plotline when I started this script. Rather, I intended to use it as a jumping-off point to discuss the unintentional implications that come with not thinking through character designs and lazily appropriating symbology while writing. But while researching, I found a comment by one of the writers of Sylas' story saying that Sylas is better at tearing down than building up, and hasn't thought about the consequences of rebellion like a lot of revolutionaries. So I might have to backtrack on that even-handedness. Honestly, this plotline is disgusting, and it should be an absolute embarrassment that there's a dramatic line alluding to it that pops up for every player while loading into one of the biggest games in the world.